The Galactic Council had warned them about Earth. Every species in the known galaxy spoke of the Death World in hushed tones, describing creatures so violent and savage that they turned warfare into an art form. The humans, they said, were monsters who thrived in conditions that would kill most civilized beings within minutes. Commander HFY of the Vrex Confederation stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue-green planet grow larger on the view screen. His 4 eyes tracked the swirling white clouds that covered what his species considered a hellscape of extreme weather, crushing gravity, and toxic atmosphere. The very air on that world could burn Vrex lungs in seconds. "Sir, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the planet's surface," reported his communications officer, her voice trembling slightly. "They're not military frequencies. They appear to be civilian channels." HFY's mandibles clicked in confusion. The intelligence reports had been clear. Earth was home to the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Humans were apex killers who had conquered their own planet through endless wars and had recently begun expanding into space with the same brutal efficiency they showed on their homeworld. "Are they coordinating their defenses?" he asked, his 3 hearts beating faster. The Vrex military had studied human combat tactics for months, preparing for the fierce resistance they expected to encounter. "No, sir, that's what's strange. The transmissions seem to be about activities, something called extreme sports and recreational events. I'm not familiar with these terms." The flagship's AI translated and displayed the intercepted messages on the main screen. HFY read them with growing bewilderment. Humans were apparently gathering in large groups to engage in something called base jumping and free climbing and white water rafting. The descriptions made no sense to his tactical mind. These must be code words for military exercises, he decided. No intelligent species would voluntarily throw themselves off high places or into rushing water for pleasure. His science officer, a thin Vrex named Colson, looked up from his scanner readings. "Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from multiple locations on the planet's surface. The readings suggest controlled explosions and high-velocity projectiles." Now this made sense. The humans were clearly preparing their weapon systems for the coming battle. HFY straightened his carapace and ordered his fleet to assume battle formation. 27 ships arranged themselves in the traditional Vrex attack pattern, weapons charging and shields at maximum power. "Open a channel to the human government," HFY commanded. "It's time to deliver our ultimatum." The main screen flickered and suddenly showed a human face. HFY had seen pictures of these creatures in intelligence briefings, but seeing one alive still sent a chill through his exoskeleton. The human had only 2 eyes, positioned in the front of its head like a predator. Its mouth revealed white teeth that could clearly tear flesh from bone. Most disturbing of all, the creature appeared to be smiling. "Hello there," the human said cheerfully. "I'm President Chen. I wasn't expecting visitors today, but you're welcome to Earth. Are you here for the X Games?" HFY's translator struggled with the term X Games, but he pushed forward with his prepared speech. "Human leader, I am Commander HFY of the Vrex Confederation. Your species stands accused of being a threat to galactic peace. We demand your immediate surrender." President Chen's smile widened, showing even more of those terrifying teeth. "A threat? That's funny. We're actually in the middle of our biggest recreational event of the year. Would you like to watch? It might change your perspective on humanity." "Your military exercises do not concern us," HFY replied sternly. "We know about your violent nature and your endless wars." "Military exercises?" President Chen laughed, a sound that made several Vrex officers step back from their stations. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding. These aren't military exercises. These are games. Sports. Things we do for fun." The human leader touched something off-screen and suddenly the view screen split, showing multiple camera feeds from the planet's surface. HFY watched in stunned silence as humans engaged in activities that defied all logic and survival instincts. In one feed, a human stood at the edge of a massive cliff, wearing nothing but thin fabric and a small backpack. Without any apparent coercion or threat to their life, the human jumped off the cliff. HFY's mandibles dropped open as he watched the creature fall towards certain death, only to deploy some kind of fabric wing from the backpack and glide safely to the ground. Another feed showed humans deliberately throwing themselves into churning white water, using only small boats and paddles to navigate rapids that would crush most species. They were laughing as they did it. A third feed displayed the most incomprehensible sight of all: Humans climbing vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet, with no safety equipment except thin ropes. When one of them fell, instead of screaming in terror, he seemed annoyed and immediately began climbing again. "This is impossible," whispered Coulson. "No species does these things voluntarily. They must be under some form of mind control." But President Chen continued smiling on the screen. "We call it recreation, Commander. Humans have always pushed ourselves to the limit, not because we have to, but because we choose to. It's what makes life interesting." Zexhai felt his worldview cracking like an eggshell. Every piece of intelligence about human aggression and violence suddenly took on a new meaning. These creatures didn't fight because they were forced to. They sought out danger and challenge because they enjoyed it. "You do these things for pleasure?" he asked weakly. "Absolutely. Would you like to see more? We've got volcano surfing, storm chasing, and cave diving happening right now. Oh, and the marathon runners should be finishing their race through Death Valley any minute now." The name Death Valley sent a shiver through every Vrex on the bridge, but President Chen said it as casually as discussing the weather. Commander Zexhai stared at the screen in growing horror as more camera feeds appeared. Humans were engaging in activities that would be considered torture or execution methods on most civilized worlds. Yet they appeared to be having the time of their lives. One feed showed a group of humans jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft, plummeting toward the ground at terminal velocity, before deploying parachutes at the last possible moment. Several of them were performing acrobatic maneuvers during their fall, spinning and flipping as if the threat of death was merely an amusing side note. "By the sacred carapace," breathed his weapons officer, "they're throwing themselves from aircraft for entertainment." Another camera revealed humans strapping themselves to massive elastic cords and leaping from bridges over deep canyons. The elastic would stretch and bounce them back up, only for them to fall again. The humans were screaming, but according to the translator, these weren't screams of terror. They were screams of joy. "This is called bungee jumping," President Chen explained helpfully. "It's quite popular with tourists. We also have zip lines, where people slide down cables suspended hundreds of feet in the air." As if summoned by his words, a new feed showed exactly that. Humans were racing down thin cables stretched between mountaintops, moving at speeds that would be fatal if they lost their grip. Children were among the participants. Coulson's scanner beeped frantically. "Sir, I'm reading massive biometric spikes from these humans. Heart rates elevated, adrenaline levels through the ceiling, stress hormones at critical levels. They must be dying," Zexhai concluded. "This is some form of mass suicide ritual." But President Chen shook his head. "Oh no, Commander. Those readings are normal for extreme sports. Humans actually seek out that biological response. We call it an adrenaline rush. It makes us feel alive." The concept was so alien to Vrex, thinking that several officers had to sit down. The Vrex were a cautious species who avoided unnecessary risks and lived carefully ordered lives. The idea of deliberately inducing stress responses for pleasure was beyond their comprehension. "Perhaps you'd like to see our underwater activities," President Chen continued. "We have people swimming with creatures that could easily kill them, diving to depths where the pressure would crush most beings, and exploring underwater caves with limited air supplies." The new feeds were even more disturbing. Humans were swimming alongside massive predatory creatures with razor-sharp teeth, apparently oblivious to the danger. Others were descending to ocean depths in tiny metal containers, while some dove down holding their breath for impossible lengths of time. "The large fish with teeth," Zexhai pointed with a trembling claw. "Why don't they attack?" "Oh, sharks rarely attack humans," President Chen said casually. "We're not really their preferred food, though occasionally there are incidents. That just makes it more exciting for thrill seekers." The communications officer was frantically cross-referencing the translation database. "Sir, I'm finding references to something called shark cage diving, where humans deliberately enter the water in metal cages to observe these predators at close range. They
cage themselves with the predators?"
Zexhai's voice cracked. "No, sir," came the trembling reply. "The cages protect them from the predators. But some humans dive without cages." On screen, President Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Free diving with sharks is gaining popularity. There's nothing quite like the thrill of being in open water with a great white." A new feed appeared showing humans racing down snowy mountains on thin boards, weaving between trees at lethal speeds. Others were performing impossible aerial maneuvers on smaller boards, launching themselves off massive jumps and spinning multiple times before landing. Winter sports, President Chen explained. Skiing, snowboarding, ski jumping. We even have something called extreme skiing where people go down slopes so steep that one wrong move means certain death. Zexai's tactical mind tried to process this information. Are these humans being forced to participate? Are they criminals facing execution? Forced? President Chen seemed genuinely puzzled. Commander, these are all voluntary activities. People pay money to participate. We have entire industries built around providing these experiences. They pay to risk their lives? Of course. The more dangerous the activity, the more expensive it tends to be. Supply and demand. The economic implications were staggering. An entire civilization had built its recreational economy around activities that would be classified as cruel and unusual punishment on any other world. A junior officer approached Zexai's command chair. Sir, our long-range sensors are detecting more human activities. There appears to be a competition where humans are running extraordinary distances across desert terrain in extreme heat. The Death Valley Marathon, President Chen confirmed. Runners cover over 40 kilometers in temperatures that can reach 50 degrees Celsius. It's quite challenging. Challenging? Coulson sputtered. Those temperatures would kill a Vrex in minutes. Well, humans are adapted to extreme environments, President Chen said with obvious pride. Our homeworld isn't called a death world for nothing. We've learned to thrive in conditions that would eliminate most species. More feeds appeared. Humans were racing vehicles across impossible terrain, leaping motorcycles over vast canyons, and driving cars at speeds that turned them into guided missiles. They were climbing frozen waterfalls using metal tools to grip the ice, camping in conditions where the ambient temperature could freeze flesh in seconds. Motorsports, ice climbing, Arctic survival challenges, President Chen narrated. Humans have always been explorers and risk-takers. It's how we evolved from hunter-gatherers to spacefaring civilization. Zexai felt something he'd never experienced before: complete tactical confusion. Every assumption about human nature was being systematically destroyed. These weren't mindless berserkers or savage warriors. They were beings who had turned the very concept of survival into entertainment. The bridge of Zexai's flagship had fallen into an eerie silence. 27 warships hung motionless in space, their crews paralyzed by the impossible sight unfolding on their screens. Every military doctrine the Vrex had developed suddenly seemed inadequate against beings who treated mortal danger as weekend entertainment. Commander, his tactical officer whispered. How do we fight an enemy that does this for fun? Zexai couldn't answer. He watched a human throw himself off a cliff with nothing but fabric wings, while another group raced vehicles through obstacle courses filled with explosions and fire. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. President Chen seemed to sense their confusion. Would you like to see our combat sports, Commander? Since you came here expecting violence, you might find them interesting. New feeds appeared, and Zexai's mandibles clicked nervously. Humans were fighting each other in caged arenas, trading devastating blows that would hospitalize most species. But instead of fight-to-the-death battles, these were organized competitions with rules and referees. Mixed martial arts, President Chen explained. Two trained fighters testing their skills against each other. Notice how they embrace afterwards? It's about respect and personal growth, not hatred. In another feed, humans were hitting each other with padded weapons while wearing protective gear, recreating ancient battles for sport. Others were racing on foot through obstacle courses that included fire, electricity, and freezing water. Historical recreation, obstacle racing, endurance challenges, President Chen continued. We even have events where people voluntarily get shocked by electricity or immersed in ice water. Coulson looked up from his medical scanners. Sir, the biometric readings from these activities suggest the humans should be in severe distress, possibly dying. But their brain chemistry indicates pleasure and satisfaction. Pain tolerance training. President Chen nodded. Humans have remarkable adaptability. We can condition ourselves to endure almost anything. It's how our ancestors survived on a world that was actively trying to kill them. A new category of feeds appeared, showing humans engaging in activities that defied the basic laws of physics as the Vrex understood them. People were riding waves of liquid water that towered above them like moving mountains, trusting their lives to thin boards and their own balance. Surfing, President Chen said with evident pride. Hawaii has some of the biggest waves on the planet. Professional surfers travel there to ride waves over 20 meters tall. 20 meters? Zexhai's voice was barely a whisper. That much water would crush any vessel. Not if you understand fluid dynamics and have enough skill. Humans have been surfing for thousands of years. We've learned to read the ocean's moods and work with its power instead of fighting it. Another feed showed humans diving from incredible heights into water, performing complex rotations and twists before entering the liquid with barely a splash. Others were racing through water using only their bodies, moving faster than many Vrex vehicles. Diving, swimming, water polo, President Chen listed. Water sports are very popular. We also enjoy sailing in storms, whitewater kayaking, and something called polar plunging where people jump into near-freezing water. The communications officer was scanning through thousands of human recreational activities. Sir, I'm finding references to activities called parkour, where humans navigate urban environments by jumping between buildings and scaling walls using only their bodies. Show them, President Chen requested. The new feeds were perhaps the most disturbing yet. Humans were moving through cities like liquid, flowing up walls, leaping across gaps that should have been impossible to cross, and treating the urban landscape as a three-dimensional playground. They weren't using any technology, just their own enhanced bodies and years of training. Parkour teaches efficient movement and spatial awareness, President Chen explained. It's excellent for both physical and mental development. Many of our military and rescue personnel train in parkour techniques. Your military trains by throwing themselves off buildings? Zexhai asked weakly. Among other things, would you like to see our military training programs? They might give you a better understanding of human capabilities. Before Zexhai could respond, new feeds appeared showing human military exercises. Soldiers were crawling through mud under live ammunition, scaling vertical obstacles while carrying heavy equipment, and enduring physical challenges that would break most civilized species. But what shocked the Vrex most was the attitude of the human soldiers. They were laughing, encouraging each other, and treating the brutal training as a bonding experience. Even under extreme duress, humans maintained their social cooperation and positive outlook. Military training is designed to push humans beyond their perceived limits, President Chen explained. We believe that growth comes from facing challenges that seem impossible. Our soldiers volunteer for this training because it makes them stronger, both individually and as a team. A particularly disturbing feed showed humans jumping out of aircraft at night, landing in hostile terrain, and then navigating through enemy-controlled territory as part of training exercises. They were doing voluntarily what most species would consider unbearable torture. Special operations training, President Chen noted. These soldiers will eventually be deployed in the galaxy's most dangerous missions. But first they must prove they can handle anything Earth can throw at them. Zexhai felt his carefully constructed understanding of the universe crumbling. President Chen, help me understand something. If humans engage in these activities for pleasure, what do you do when you're actually angry? President Chen's smile faded slightly, and for the first time Zexhai saw something that truly frightened him. The human's eyes hardened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the Vrex commander's exoskeleton ache. Commander, everything you've seen today represents humans at peace, pursuing personal growth and entertainment. You really don't want to see what we're capable of when we're angry. The feeds continued showing humans base jumping, rock climbing, and engaging in extreme sports. But now Zexhai saw them differently. These weren't dangerous activities for humans. These were their idea of relaxation. The silence on the Vrex bridge stretched for long minutes as the crew processed President Chen's words. Finally, Zexhai found his voice, though it trembled with newfound understanding. President Chen, perhaps we should discuss this diplomatic situation more carefully. The Galactic Council sent us here based on reports of human aggression and military expansion. President Chen nodded thoughtfully. I can understand their concern. When humans first made contact with galactic civilization, there were some misunderstandings about our nature. But I think those reports might have been taken out of context. Out of context? Zexhai's tactical officer interjected. Our intelligence reports document numerous instances of human forces overwhelming superior alien technology through pure determination and ferocity. Ah, you must be referring to the Krylon incident, President Chen said. Yes, that was unfortunate. But the Krylon attacked one of our research stations without warning, killing hundreds of civilians. The human response was proportional, New feeds appeared on the screen, but these weren't recreational activities. These showed archived footage of human military operations, and the difference was immediately apparent. Where the extreme sports showed humans challenging themselves against natural forces, these clips showed humans working together with terrifying efficiency against actual threats. This is what humans look like when we're defending ourselves, President Chen explained quietly. Notice the difference? The difference was profound and chilling. In the recreational feeds, humans were individuals pursuing personal challenges with joy and laughter. In the military footage, they moved like a single organism, each person perfectly coordinated with their teammates, their faces set with grim determination. HFY watched human soldiers adapt to impossible situations in real time, using their recreational training in deadly serious contexts. A soldier who had clearly spent years rock climbing scaled a sheer wall under enemy fire. Another who had obviously practiced extreme skiing navigated difficult terrain that left enemy forces helpless. You train for war by treating survival as entertainment, HFY said, the strategic implications hitting him like a physical blow. We don't train for war, President Chen corrected. We train for life. Everything you've seen today makes humans better at existing in a dangerous universe. The fact that it also makes us formidable in conflict is just a side effect. Coulson had been running calculations on his scanner. Sir, if their recreational activities are this intense and their actual military capabilities are proportionally greater. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Every Vrex on the bridge was performing the same terrifying math. A species that threw itself off cliffs for fun and climbed mountains for personal growth would be absolutely unstoppable in actual combat. How many humans engage in these extreme activities? HFY asked, dreading the answer. Oh, hundreds of millions, President Chen replied casually. Extreme sports are growing in popularity every year. We estimate that about 40% of our population has tried at least one extreme sport, and about 15% participate regularly. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions of beings who voluntarily subjected themselves to deadly challenges as a hobby. The military implications were beyond anything the Galactic Council had imagined. But that's just Earth, President Chen continued. Our colonial worlds have developed their own extreme sports based on local conditions. Mars has low-gravity athletics that would be impossible here. Europa has under-ice exploration sports. The asteroid mining stations have developed three-dimensional racing through asteroid fields. HFY felt physically ill. Humans weren't just thriving on their Deathworld home planet. They were spreading across the galaxy and turning every dangerous environment into a playground. President Chen, I need to ask directly. What would happen if the Galactic Council decided to enforce their ultimatum through military action? President Chen's expression grew serious. Commander, humans have been fighting for survival since we first stood upright on the African savanna. We've faced ice ages, natural disasters, predators, diseases, and countless wars. We've never been a species that gives up easily. But what would you actually do? The same thing we always do when threatened. We'd adapt, overcome, and protect our people. But I hope it doesn't come to that. Humans prefer cooperation to conflict when possible. New feeds appeared showing human rescue operations. Teams were diving into collapsed buildings, rappelling down cliffs to reach stranded climbers, and flying helicopters in impossible weather conditions to save lives. The same skills and fearlessness they displayed in recreation were being used to help others. This is what humans do when people are in danger, President Chen explained. We risk our own lives to save others, often people we've never met. It's one of our defining characteristics. The rescue footage was somehow more intimidating than the military clips. Humans routinely threw themselves into mortal danger, not for personal gain or strategic advantage, but simply because someone needed help. They possessed a combination of capability and moral drive that made them unlike any species in the galaxy. Your people rescue others as readily as they seek danger for themselves, HFY observed. Risk and compassion often go together, President Chen replied. When you're comfortable with danger, you can help people that others can't reach. Our mountain rescue teams, for example, are all experienced climbers who volunteer their time to save stranded hikers. More feeds showed humans responding to natural disasters, space emergencies, and alien distress calls. In every case, they moved toward danger rather than away from it, driven by an apparently instinctive need to help others. Commander, President Chen said gently, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature. Yes, we're capable of incredible violence when threatened, but we're also capable of incredible sacrifice to protect others. The same characteristics that make us dangerous also make us valuable allies. Zexhai looked around his bridge at the frozen faces of his crew. Every military protocol they'd trained for assumed enemies that made logical, predictable decisions based on self-preservation. Humans appeared to make decisions based on principles that transcended personal safety. "What do you want from the galaxy?" he asked. "The same thing most species want," President Chen replied. "Trade, exploration, friendship, and the chance to build something better than what we have now. We're not interested in conquest or domination. We have an entire universe to explore, and we'd rather do it with friends than enemies." Commander Zexhai found himself in an impossible position. His orders had been clear: demand human surrender or face military consequences. But how could he threaten a species that treated mortal danger as entertainment and responded to threats with capabilities beyond galactic comprehension? "President Chen," he said carefully, "I must report back to the Galactic Council. They expect either your surrender or confirmation that military action will be necessary." President Chen leaned back in his chair, still maintaining that unsettling human smile. "Of course, Commander. But before you make your report, would you like to actually visit Earth, see these activities firsthand? I think it might give you a better understanding to share with the Council." The suggestion sent a wave of terror through the Vrex crew. The idea of actually setting foot on the Deathworld was beyond their worst nightmares. But Zexhai realized that a first-hand report might be the only way to convince the Council that their assumptions about humanity were catastrophically wrong. That's not possible," he stammered. "Our species cannot survive in your environment." "We can accommodate that," President Chen replied easily. "We have environmental suits designed for visiting aliens, and our space elevators can take you to orbital facilities with controlled atmospheres. You wouldn't need to experience Earth's surface conditions directly." The casual mention of space elevators sent another shock through the bridge. The Vrex had been told humans were a primitive species just beginning to explore space. Structures that could reach from planetary surface to orbit represented engineering capabilities that rivaled the most advanced galactic civilizations. "How many space elevators do you have?" Carlson asked weakly. 7 operational with 3 more under construction," President Chen replied. "They're essential for our space-based recreational activities." "Recreational activities in space?" "Oh yes, zero-gravity sports are becoming very popular. We have orbital athletic facilities, races between space stations, and some people even do extreme EVA activities outside spacecraft with just basic life support." The feeds changed again, showing humans floating in zero gravity, racing through 3-dimensional obstacle courses, and performing athletic feats impossible under planetary gravity. Others were literally floating outside spaceships, using small thruster packs to navigate around space stations in activities that looked like deadly games of tag. "EVA sports," President Chen explained. "Extravehicular activities for recreation. Participants use minimal life support and rely on skill and training to navigate complex 3-dimensional environments in the vacuum of space." Zexhai's worldview, already cracked, shattered completely. Humans were using the vacuum of space as a recreational environment. They had turned the most hostile environment possible into a playground. "Your people play games in the void between stars," he whispered. "Well, not between stars yet," President Chen admitted. "But we're working on it. There are plans for extreme sports competitions in the asteroid belt, and some of our more adventurous athletes want to try solar sailing races." The communications officer was frantically updating his reports. "Sir, I'm detecting massive industrial activity throughout the human solar system. Construction projects, mining operations, and what appear to be purely recreational facilities on multiple worlds and space habitats. Humans don't just survive in extreme environments," Zexhai realized. "You reshape them to suit your purposes." "When possible, yes," President Chen agreed. "But we also enjoy adapting ourselves to new challenges. Did you know we have underwater cities on Europa? The pressure and cold that would kill most species just required some engineering solutions and human determination. New feeds showed human colonies in environments that would be impossible for most species even with advanced technology. Underwater cities, settlements in active volcanic regions, research stations in gas giant atmospheres, and habitats built inside asteroids. Each environment presents unique recreational opportunities. President Chen continued enthusiastically. Low-gravity worlds are perfect for extreme climbing and flying sports. High-gravity worlds provide excellent strength training environments. Gas giants offer atmospheric diving experiences unlike anything possible on solid worlds. The pattern was becoming clear to Zexhai. Humans didn't just tolerate dangerous environments or adapt to them out of necessity. They actively sought out the most challenging conditions they could find and turned them into opportunities for growth and entertainment. President Chen, I have a tactical question. If the Galactic Council decided to impose economic sanctions or attempt to isolate humanity, what would happen? Honestly, we'd probably be disappointed but not particularly hindered. President Chen replied. Humans are pretty good at making do with what we have. Isolation just means we'd focus more on developing our own systems and expanding our own territory. And if they attempted military action? President Chen's expression became thoughtful. Commander, humans have been fighting for survival our entire evolutionary history. We've faced extinction-level events multiple times and survived through cooperation, determination, and our ability to adapt to impossible circumstances. Military action against humanity would be inadvisable. Because of your advanced technology? No, because of our nature. Human history is filled with examples of small, determined groups defeating much larger, better-equipped forces through pure stubbornness and innovative tactics. We don't give up, we don't surrender, and we turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The feed switched to historical human conflicts, showing how humans had consistently defeated superior forces through unconventional thinking, environmental adaptation, and sheer refusal to accept defeat. In every case, humans had turned their weaknesses into strengths and their enemies' advantages into liabilities. You see, President Chen continued, the same mentality that makes humans jump off cliffs for fun also makes us extremely difficult to defeat in serious conflicts. We don't think like other species. Where others see impossible odds, we see interesting challenges. Zexhai understood now why every intelligence report had focused on human aggression and military capability. But those reports had missed the crucial context. Humans weren't aggressive by nature. They were simply unafraid of challenge and change in ways that other species couldn't comprehend. Commander, President Chen said gently, I'd like to make a proposal. Instead of returning to the Galactic Council with a military report, why don't you stay for a few days? Experience human civilization firsthand. Meet our people, see our culture, understand what we're really about. Then you can give the Council a complete picture instead of just military assessments. 3 days later, Commander Zexhai stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, Earth's moon-based diplomatic facility, watching his worldview complete its transformation. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see Earth hanging in space like a blue-white jewel, no longer the terrifying death world of galactic legend, but a vibrant planet whose inhabitants had turned survival into art. Behind him, his officers were engaged in animated conversations with human diplomats, scientists, and even some of the extreme sports athletes they'd observed from orbit. The cultural exchange had been unlike anything in Zexhai's experience. Commander, Coulson approached, his usual nervous demeanor replaced by something approaching excitement. The human engineers have shown me their space elevator designs. The engineering principles are sound, but the construction required cooperation between millions of individuals working across multiple decades. Their species' ability to maintain long-term projects is remarkable. And their safety standards? Zexhai asked, still trying to reconcile human risk-taking with their obvious intelligence. Paradoxically excellent, Coulson replied. They take calculated risks, not foolish ones. Every extreme sport has extensive safety protocols, training requirements, and emergency response systems. They push boundaries, but they do so intelligently. President Chen joined them at the observation window, still wearing that unsettling but now somehow comforting human smile. What do you think, Commander? Has your perspective on humanity changed? Zexhai considered his words carefully. President Chen, I came here expecting to find dangerous savages who needed to be contained for galactic safety. Instead, I've discovered a species that has mastered the art of controlled danger and turned personal growth into a cultural philosophy. That's probably the most accurate assessment of humanity I've heard from a galactic representative. President Chen replied, We're not violent by nature, But we're also not afraid of conflict when necessary. We seek challenges because they make us stronger, and we help others because cooperation is how we've always survived. Through the window, they could see human spacecraft coming and going from Earth's orbital facilities. Some were massive cargo vessels supporting the growing interplanetary economy. Others were sleek racing ships designed for the asteroid belt competitions. A few were rescue vessels maintaining constant readiness to assist any ship in distress, regardless of species. Your rescue protocols, Zexai mentioned. We monitored your communications during our visit. Human ships respond to distress calls throughout the solar system, even from species that haven't formally made contact. Of course, President Chen said, as if this was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. When someone's in trouble, you help them. That's basic humanity. But you don't know these species. They might be hostile. They might be, President Chen agreed. But if they're calling for help, they're also vulnerable and in need. Humans have a hard time ignoring that, even when it's tactically inadvisable. Zexai had spent considerable time reviewing human history during his visit. The pattern was consistent across millennia. Humans routinely risked themselves for others, often strangers, driven by principles that transcended logical self-interest. Commander, his communications officer approached with a concerned expression. We're receiving priority transmissions from the Galactic Council. They're demanding an immediate status report and threaten to send additional fleets if we don't respond soon. The moment of truth had arrived. Zexai looked at President Chen, then at his officers who had spent 3 days learning that everything they'd believed about humanity was wrong. President Chen, I need to ask one final question. If I report back to the Council that humanity poses no threat to galactic civilization, and they disagree, what happens then? President Chen's expression grew serious. Then we'll have to prove it to them the same way we proved it to you. Through demonstration, patience, and hopefully wisdom on all sides. And if they send more fleets, then we'll deal with that situation when it arises. But Commander, I hope you'll help us avoid that outcome. You've seen what humans are really like. You know we're not the monsters your council fears. Zexai activated his personal communicator and opened a channel to the Galactic Council chambers. The holographic image of the council speaker appeared, his expression demanding immediate answers. Commander Zexai, report your status immediately. Are the humans contained? Council Speaker, I request permission to address the full council in person upon my return. The situation here is far more complex than our intelligence reports suggested. Have you secured their surrender? Zexai took a breath, knowing his next words would change everything. Sir, I recommend that the Council's human policy be completely reconsidered. Our assumptions about this species were fundamentally incorrect. The silence from the council chamber was deafening. When the speaker finally responded, his voice carried both anger and confusion. Commander, explain yourself immediately. Speaker, humans are not the aggressive monsters we believe them to be. They are a species that has turned personal growth and challenge into their primary cultural values. What we interpreted as violent tendencies are actually recreational activities designed to push individual limits and build community cooperation. Recreational activities? Sir, humans voluntarily engage in activities more dangerous than most species' military training, and they do it for fun. They've built a civilization based on constant self-improvement, environmental adaptation, and mutual aid. They're not a threat to galactic civilization. They're an example of what's possible when a species refuses to accept limitations. President Chen stepped into view of the communicator. Council Speaker, humanity extends an invitation to the Galactic Council. Send representatives to observe our civilization firsthand. We believe direct experience will resolve these misunderstandings more effectively than military threats. The speaker's image flickered as he consulted with other council members. When he returned, his expression showed careful consideration rather than immediate hostility. Very well, a diplomatic mission will be arranged. But Commander Zexai, you will remain to ensure human cooperation during this process. Sir, I volunteer to stay, Zexai replied immediately. I believe ongoing diplomatic relations with humanity will benefit all galactic species. As the communication ended, President Chen extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. Zexai carefully touched it with his claw, sealing what he hoped would be the beginning of a new era in galactic relations. Looking out at Earth once more, Sci-Fi reflected on how 3 days had completely transformed his understanding of what was possible. Humans had shown him that strength didn't require aggression, that courage could be channeled into growth rather than conquest, and that a species could face the universe with joy rather than fear. The galaxy was about to learn that its most feared death world had produced not monsters, but teachers who could show other species how to thrive in the face of any challenge. And that lesson would change everything.